I was a kid growing up in San Antonio, Texas. It wasn't anything special. I didn't go to any kind of special school or have any kind of special ability. I was just a regular kid. And so I didn't want to write about what I knew. Instead, I wanted to make things up. So I started writing stories when I was very young. And the only thing I could draw on was my own experience with my family. I had a lot of storytellers in my family. Ever since I was very young, I knew I wanted to be a storyteller. Let's see if we can get this thing going here. But the first storyteller that I had in my family was my grandfather. He was a great guy. He used to tell me stories. He would sit me on his lap and he would tell me all these stories. There's space for those in this. Alright, let's get through one of those days. I see how it is. Oh, there it is. That's the Colonel. He was my grandfather. We called him the Colonel because he was in the Air Force. And he used to sit me on his lap. He would tell me stories all the time. And I thought it was just like magic. Make them up. He had this big briefcase full of blank paper. He would draw pictures for me and tell me stories. It was awesome. My parents were also big storytellers. They loved to talk to me about like mythology. That's me again. They used to tell me stories all about mythology. And when I was about the 6th grade, and that's me in 6th grade, I finally really got into reading. And the first book I really enjoyed was the Lord of the Rings series. And I had a great teacher when I was in 8th grade who told me that if I liked mythology, that I would probably really enjoy the Norse myths, the Greek myths, because they were related to the Lord of the Rings. So she got me writing. And so when I was in 8th grade, she read the first story that I ever did. And she said, Rick, this is really, really good. You ought to try to get this published. I was like, how do you get something published? How do you do that? She said, well, we can try. We can try to send it off and see if a magazine will accept it. Let's see. And finally, we sent off the story. I waited for like 2 months, and then this arrived in the mail. That was my first rejection note. And if you look at it, you see it's so old. It's not done on a computer because we didn't have computers. It was typed on a typewriter on carbon paper. The editor was really nice about it. He said, "Dear Rick, first of all, there's no such thing as being too young to write. If you can do it, go for it." He said, "This is great, but we can't use it. Keep trying." My mom was so proud that I got rejected. She put this in a frame and she hung it in the house, and I had to look at it every time I walked in. And true story, when I was in college, my mom's house burned to the ground.
Oh.
I know, everything was destroyed, except that. They pulled the letter out of the fire, totally fine, put it back in the frame, and it's still hanging in my mom's house. So if you ever need to build a house, build it out of rejection notes, so you can't make it. I went to college and I got my degree, and I never did get published right away anyway. But I decided that if I couldn't get published, maybe I could become a teacher, and so I did. Yeah, and I had this reputation for telling stories in the class. And there's me when I did Shakespeare, and here's Colonial Rick, and there's Civil War Rick. But I wasn't writing stories for my kids. I was telling lots of stories in the classroom, and they would always ask me why I wasn't writing books for children. I said, well, I don't have time to do that. But I started thinking, maybe I would like to write something. At the time I was in San Francisco, my wife and I were living out there, and I was a middle school teacher. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, having a good time with that. you know, maybe there's something to that after all. I wonder if I should write a book set in Texas. I decided to make it a murder mystery, because that's the sort of thing I liked to read back then. And so I began writing a novel while I was teaching middle school. How do you write a novel? I had no idea. I used to tell my students, though, that if you're going to write something, it's probably a good idea to outline it first. And so I wrote an outline. There it is. The real thing is about the size of a doorway, and every square is a chapter in the book. And so if I ever got stuck, I would just look at the wall, and I would just follow it along and write chapter after chapter. Which, by the way, if you ever have writer's block, that's a great thing to do. That way you don't get to the middle and not know what you're going to do next, because at least you have some kind of roadmap. Nevertheless, it was hard. It took me about a year to write the entire book. When I was done, I had a manuscript that looked something like the clicker that's not going. I had this manuscript. It was about 375 pages. Yeah, there it is. And if you were to look inside, you would see that every page is covered in correction marks. I sent it to like 3 different editors who had to read it, and they gave me all these advices, and I had to follow it and rewrite it again. Do you ever have to do that in school, where you write it once? Me too. But I have found out that that's just the way it works. You have to rewrite. No one has ever written a perfect first draft. I've written 20 books. Mark and Athena is book number 20 for me. I still can't write it right the first time. I have to revise and revise. Anybody want to guess how many times I had to revise my first novel before it was finally published? About 5 times? What do you think? About 10 times? Actually, 14 times. Yeah, was it fun? Absolutely not. But it was necessary, and finally we got it done. And when the book came out, so if I put it over there, either I'll pull somebody up. Oh, look at that. Okay, thank you. And this is the cover of the book when it first came out. It was called Big Red Tequila. Everything in Texas is bigger, even murder. It did pretty well. It won some awards. But, you know, again, it wasn't for kids. It was more of an adult novel. The editor decided they liked it enough where they would like to have me write a book a year. So I began doing a murder mystery every year while I was teaching school. Here's the second one, The Widower's Two-Step. This one is about someone who's killing off country western music singers. Anyway, the next book was called The Devil Went Down to Austin. You can probably guess where that one takes place. This one was a lot of fun to research. I knew I wanted to do a book set in Austin, but I didn't know what it was going to be about. So I went up to Austin and I talked to a bunch of homicide investigators.